Today I want to talk a little bit more about the M4 iPad Air, and really the iPad Air in general. See, when I think of the iPad Air, I think of an iPad that's really sitting on something of an edge or a precipice. The Air is a very good product that's easy to recommend, but it's not a great product. It's so incredibly close to being great, but for whatever reason, Apple isn't doing the things that they should to make this iPad even stronger. On the other hand, I see this iPad as being on the edge of losing its kind of great value status it's held for all these years. Most people buying an iPad aren't going to go any higher than the iPad Air, and you get a lot for that $599. But things have changed in the last year, and $599 looks different today in the Apple ecosystem than it did just a year ago. Obviously, the MacBook Neo colors that perception a little bit for all of the amazing things you get for that same $599 price point, but it's more than just the Neo. The iPhone also looks different than it did just a year ago. Between the iPhone 17e and the base iPhone 17 and the things that those products get you at their price points, it's hard not to look at the Air and not feel a little bit disappointed that Apple seems to be coasting and not putting the effort and work into this iPad that they need to make it even more compelling product. So I picked up the 13-inch Air this time in purple with 120 gigabytes of storage and 12 gigabytes of RAM. Normally I talk about the design here. There's not much to say. The design is unchanged from the previous two generations. In fact, the colors are the same, which is pretty disappointing. But as an iPad Pro user, I will say, even though I appreciate the benefits of the Pro cameras, the single camera iPads like the Air have much more attractive camera bumps. So it has that going for it. But then there's the display, which is probably my biggest issue with the M4 Air. Like the design, it is unchanged from the previous two generations. We have an 11-inch or a 13-inch liquid retina display that supports P3 wide color and gets up to 500 nits of brightness on the 11-inch, 600 nits on the 13-inch. The screen does okay outdoors, but if using your iPad outdoors is something you're going to be doing a lot, you're going to want to pay the extra money for the iPad Pro and probably look at the nano texture option, which is ungodly expensive, but from people I've talked to, really does the job in terms of reflections. Compared to the rest of the iPads in the lineup, the iPad Air's display is good. It's actually really good. It's second only to, obviously, the iPad Pro, which has OLED, which has ProMotion, which has higher brightness, supports HDR, all of those things. Obviously, that's a better display. The Air isn't a slouch from that perspective. Where I have a problem is the fact that it hasn't changed in the past few years, but the world around it sure has. Just look at the iPhone. For that same $599 that the Air starts at, you can get an iPhone 17e with an OLED display. I get the Air is bigger, but that's still a little strange. But then you go up to the base iPhone 17, which costs the same $799 as the 13-inch Air, and you get OLED and ProMotion now. So it's hard for me to look at the Air's display in 2026 and think of any good reason why this display does not support high refresh rate ProMotion. You could argue that the MacBook Neo at the same price, or even the MacBook Air, now at $1099, both have 60Hz displays, and people are generally fine with that. I think it's a little different though for touch devices. For devices you're directly manipulating, ProMotion adds a real visceral benefit to how you interact with the iPad. And in my mind, it's getting harder and harder to excuse this omission every year. The move to the M4 chip was obviously the biggest benefit that the Air gets this time around. The core configuration remains the same, that's 3 performance cores and 5 efficiency cores, but of course, those CPU cores are faster and more efficient than the ones that were in the M3. To be completely honest, in everyday use, you won't be able to tell any difference between the M3, probably the M2 even, and the M4 Air. For day-to-day tasks like email and web browsing, they're going to feel identical. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's really more of a testament to iPadOS and how well it handles what would be considered low-end hardware in the traditional PC world. With everything going on right now, with rising storage and RAM prices, I am honestly still surprised that Apple chose to bump the RAM in the M4 Air from 8GB to 12GB across the board. This is another area where, depending on how you use your iPad, you may not even feel this difference. But in terms of long-term use of this iPad, this is really important. If you're using pro apps like Final Cut or ZBrush, these apps perform better with more RAM available to them. The heaviest thing I do on my iPads, of course, is video editing, and Final Cut Pro was just as responsive as my M4 or M5 iPad Pros on this Air. Between the additional 4GB of RAM and the improved neural engine on the M4, on-device AI actions have the potential to perform significantly better than on the M2 or M3 Air. You wouldn't know that today because Apple Intelligence doesn't do much, but it stands to reason that in the future, there will be software that takes advantage of this additional AI capability. When I talked about the M4 earlier, I mentioned that it is more efficient than the M3. I expected the M4 Air to have thermal characteristics similar to my M4 iPad Pro, but it really doesn't. It feels really just like the M3 Air and pretty much any other iPad, in that when you put the iPad under load, there's kind of a hot spot on the back, presumably around the chip, that gets really warm when you start pushing the iPad. On this iPad, that hot spot is on the landscape edge of the device, kind of near the Apple Pencil charging area, and it gets warm in all the same scenarios that we're used to with iPads: long note-taking sessions, gaming. If you plug into a display, that's all the same. These are thermally constrained devices. It's going to happen, unfortunately. Like most everything else this time around, the camera situation is pretty much the same on the M4 Air as it was before. We have the 12 megapixel center stage camera on the front and the 12 megapixel shooter on the rear. Now, I'm a little disappointed in these cameras for a few reasons. I was really hoping this would be the first opportunity for Apple to bring over the improved front camera from the iPhone 17 series to the iPad. Even if it's nothing more than the megapixel bump from 12 to 18, video calls is a pretty core use case for an iPad, and I'd argue those cameras, if nothing else, should be the absolute best that they can be. And so it's disappointing the Air didn't see the same improvement that the iPhone saw last year. And then there's the rear camera. Rear camera is still great for taking pictures and videos. I take a lot of dog photos with it, but I can't figure out why the Air, or really no iPad, supports visual intelligence yet. It's the Apple Intelligence feature on the iPhone that helps you identify objects with the camera viewfinder and take actions on them. For whatever reason, Apple doesn't think that's a use case for an iPad, and I would strongly disagree with that. It's a disappointing waste and really underutilizing the cameras on the iPad Air. Like you'd hope with a new device running a high-end tablet chip, the iPad Air runs iPadOS 26 beautifully. Animations are smooth, the liquid glass effects look great. I think it looks overall pretty good. If you're someone who buys an iPad and the Magic Keyboard case or one of the cheaper alternatives, and you want to use your iPad like a laptop sometimes, you get a great experience with iPadOS 26 on this iPad. Especially on the 13-inch size, which I've been using, I can keep my iPad basically in windowed apps mode, whether I'm using the keyboard or not, and everything feels really natural. I still subscribe to this theory that these changes in iPadOS 26 around windowing were really intended for a larger iPad that Apple apparently canceled a few years ago, because iPadOS 26 feels really great on the big iPads, and arguably less so as the screen size gets smaller. We have Apple's N1 chip, which brings Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth 6, and if you go with the cellular option, you get Apple's C1X 5G modem. When I tested the C1X modem on my M5 iPad Pro, I found it to mostly be a wash in terms of performance. There were some cases where it was faster than Qualcomm's option, some cases where it was slower. The big benefit Apple touts is battery efficiency with that chip anyway, so in theory they can manage the power better, but I honestly can't tell any difference. In terms of performance, there were some cases where it was faster than Qualcomm's option, some cases where it was slower. But the big benefit Apple touts is battery efficiency with that chip anyway, so in theory they can manage the power better than they could with Qualcomm's modems, so something I don't think that should affect you, but I honestly can't tell any difference, and I don't think that should affect, and I'd argue that really shouldn't be a factor in any kind of buying decision. One of my biggest complaints with the M4 Air is actually the pricing. So on one hand, it's great. You can get the 11-inch iPad Air with that 12 gigs of RAM at the same $599 starting price point as before. But that entry config only starts at 128 gigabytes of storage. The MacBook Neo for that same $599 gives you 256 gigabytes of storage. The iPhone 17e for that same $599 starting price starts you at 256 gigabytes of RAM. We're not quite at the point where 128 gigabytes is anemic or a problem, but again, it goes back to that whole idea of the iPad Air feeling like a great value. This is one of those areas Apple really needs to address. If they're going to start their other computers at 256, the iPads need to start there as well, period. The M4 iPad Air is a very strong iPad. I can recommend it to a lot of people, but I'm not going to pretend that it hasn't been stagnating the past couple of years. I really want to see Apple do more to make this a better product. And I've said this before, and I'll probably say it in every iPad review. The biggest problem the iPad faces isn't another competitor, it's not even the Mac or the MacBook Neo, it's really the fact that Apple has no real tablet competition. They can continue to do these small changes and kind of coast, because what else am I going to recommend someone get? A Surface? For someone who wants a tablet as a tablet, it's pretty much the iPad and nothing else. The M4 Air is still one of the best iPads you can buy, but Apple can do better, and I'm really hoping sometime soon they start doing better. That's going to do it for this one. As always, if you made it to the end, thank you. I appreciate you and your time. If you could like the video and subscribe to the channel, that would help me and the channel out a bunch. And I will catch you all in the next one. Take care.